I never imagined that a single manila folder would shatter everything I believed about my family. For 15 years, I sacrificed my dreams, funded my sister's extravagant lifestyle, and financially supported my mother, all while being told I was doing my duty as the responsible daughter. Then I discovered that the inheritance my father had left specifically for me, worth over $2 million, had been systematically drained and redirected to my sister while I worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. What happened next changed not just my financial future, but fundamentally transformed how I understood family, obligation, and my own worth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You always were so selfish, Olivia, after everything we've done for you. My mother's words hung in the air of the upscale restaurant where my family had gathered to discuss my sister Rebecca's latest emergency. I stared at the expectant faces around the table, my mother Catherine with her carefully maintained appearance that belied our supposed financial struggles, my younger sister Rebecca wearing designer clothes I couldn't afford even with my executive position, and my brother-in-law Derek looking vaguely uncomfortable, but remaining silent as always. "It's just a loan," Rebecca continued, expertly dabbing at the corner of her eye where a tear threatened to spill. "The beach house renovation went over budget, and the contractors are threatening to put a lien on the property. It's only $80,000. Only $80,000. As if that were pocket change. As if I hadn't already loaned Rebecca over $200,000 in the past 5 years, money that had never been repaid and was never mentioned again after it left my account. I took a sip of water, buying myself time. At 34, I should have been at the peak of my career, building my own wealth and security. Instead, I was drowning in the constant financial demands of my family while watching my own future slip away with each transfer. "I can't," I said finally, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. I never said no. I was Olivia Bennett, the reliable one, the responsible daughter who stepped up after Dad died 12 years ago. "I just can't do it this time." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face hardened, the warmth evaporating from her eyes. "What do you mean you can't?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You're the vice president of operations at Meridian Tech. We all know what your salary is." What they didn't know was how I'd been forced to take out a second mortgage on my modest home to cover the last emergency 6 months ago when Rebecca's husband needed seed money for a business venture that mysteriously never materialized. They didn't know about the retirement accounts I'd depleted, the savings I'd sacrificed, the vacations and small luxuries I'd never allowed myself while funding their lifestyle. "My financial situation is complicated right now," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "I've got the property tax coming due, and some investments that haven't." "Oh, spare us," Rebecca interrupted, all pretense of tears gone. "You've always been so dramatic about money. Dad would be so disappointed to see how selfish you've become." The mention of our father hit me like a physical blow. Richard Bennett had been my hero, brilliant, kind, and unfailingly supportive of both his daughters. His sudden death from a heart attack when I was 22 had devastated me. I'd been halfway through my MBA program, and it was only through sheer determination and the memory of his encouragement that I'd managed to graduate with honors despite my grief. "Don't bring Dad into this," I said quietly, my hands trembling, slightly under the table. "He would have wanted all of us to be financially responsible." My mother scoffed. "Your father would have wanted you to take care of your family. That's what he did. That's what he expected you to do as the oldest." Something inside me, something that had been bending for years under the weight of expectation and manipulation, finally snapped. "You know what? I've been taking care of this family for 12 years, I said, my voice stronger now. "I paid off your credit card debt, Mom. I covered the down payment on Rebecca's first house. I've funded every crisis, every emergency, every whim. I've never asked for anything in return. Not even a thank you. But I can't do it anymore. I'm drowning. The waiter approached with our appetizers, sensed the tension, and quickly retreated. In the awkward pause, I noticed an elderly couple at a nearby table watching us with poorly disguised interest. "You act like you're the only one who lost him," Rebecca said, her voice rising. "He was my father too, you know, and Mom's husband. We all suffered." "I know that," I replied. "But somehow I'm the only one who's been expected to sacrifice. You're living in a house 3 times the size of mine. You take luxury vacations while I haven't had a day off in 3 years. Mom's condo is in the most expensive part of the city. Meanwhile, I'm working myself to exhaustion trying to keep everyone afloat." My mother's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you throw your assistance in our faces? Is that what family means to you? Keeping score? It's not about keeping score. It's about fairness. It's about the fact that I've put my entire life on hold to support everyone else's dreams and comforts." Derek, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Maybe we should all take some time to cool down. This isn't the place." "No," my mother cut him off. "Olivia needs to understand her responsibilities. Your father left this family in a difficult position, and as the successful one, it's your duty to step up." Something about her phrasing caught my attention. My father had been a successful investment advisor with his own firm. I'd always been told that his business partner had bought out his share of the company after his death, providing my mother with just enough to maintain a modest lifestyle. But the narrative had always been vague, the details shifting whenever I asked specific questions. "What do you mean he left us in a difficult position?" I asked. "Dad was always careful with money. His firm was doing well. There should have been substantial assets." A flicker of something, alarm, guilt, crossed my mother's face before she composed herself. The business wasn't as profitable as he led us to believe. There were complications after his death, debts we didn't know about. "What debts? You never mentioned any debts before." "It was a difficult time," she said dismissively. "I handled it as best I could. The point is, your success is a direct result of the opportunities your father provided. The expensive education, the connections that got you your first job. You owe your family." The implication that my career success was due to anything other than my own relentless work ethic and sleepless nights was the final straw. "I'm leaving," I said, placing my napkin on the table and reaching for my purse. "I love you all, but I can't do this anymore. I need some time to think." "If you walk out that door," my mother said, her voice cold, "don't expect us to be there when you come crawling back. Family means being there no matter what. If you can't understand that, then maybe you're not the daughter we thought you were." The words struck deep, triggering the familiar guilt that had kept me compliant for so many years. But for once, the guilt wasn't enough to override my sense of self-preservation. "I guess we'll find out," I replied, standing up. I looked at each of their faces, my mother's anger, Rebecca's calculated distress, Derek's uncomfortable avoidance, and felt a profound sadness. When had we become this? When had love become so entangled with financial obligation? As I walked out of the restaurant into the cool evening air, I felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. For the first time in 12 years, I had prioritized my own welfare over my family's demands. The ground beneath my feet seemed uncertain, my identity as the family provider and problem solver suddenly in question. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined as I drove home alone that night, was that this breaking point wasn't the end of something, but the beginning. It was the first crack in a carefully constructed facade that would soon collapse entirely, revealing a truth more painful and ultimately more liberating than I could have ever anticipated. The following morning, I awoke to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Most were from Rebecca, oscillating between tearful pleas and vicious accusations. Several were from my mother, her messages growing progressively colder and more threatening. Even Derek had texted once, a vague message about working things out as a family. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on my nightstand. For the first time in years, I called in sick to work. As vice president of operations, I was responsible for overseeing 3 departments and nearly 70 employees. I hadn't taken a personal day in over 2 years, not even when I'd had bronchitis last winter. But today, the thought of putting on my professional mask and making decisions felt impossible. Instead, I made a cup of coffee and carried it out to my small back patio. My home was modest by any standard, a 2-bedroom bungalow in a middle-class neighborhood, but I'd always loved its charm and potential. When I'd purchased it 5 years ago, I'd had grand plans for renovations, a kitchen remodel, built-in bookshelves in the living room, perhaps a pergola in the backyard. None of those plans had materialized as my finances were continuously diverted to family emergencies. My neighbor, Eleanor Rhodes, was already in her garden despite the early hour. At 78, she had more energy than most people half her age. I'd always admired her sharp mind and direct manner, though our interactions had been limited to casual greetings and occasional conversations over the fence. Today, she looked up from her roses and studied me with perceptive gray eyes. "You look like someone facing a crossroads," she said without preamble. I smiled weakly. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's seen that same look in the mirror. She pulled off her gardening gloves. "I'm taking a break. Join me for tea?" Under normal circumstances, I might have politely declined. But normal? Had evaporated the moment I'd walked out of that restaurant. Without my usual excuses about work deadlines or family obligations, I found myself nodding. Eleanor's home was a testament to a life fully lived. Books lined every wall, interspersed with photographs and mementos from what appeared to be extensive travels. The furniture was well-worn but quality, and original artwork hung in place of the mass-produced prints that decorated most homes. "You have a beautiful home," I said as she handed me a delicate china cup filled with fragrant tea. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thank you. It's taken me 78 years to curate exactly what I want and nothing I don't. She settled into an armchair across from me. Now, what's troubling you? And don't say nothing. I may be old, but my eyesight and intuition work just fine. There was something about Eleanor's direct approach that bypassed my usual deflections. Before I quite realized what was happening, I found myself telling her everything: the years of financial support, the endless demands, the guilt tactics, and finally, my refusal the previous night. Eleanor listened without interruption, occasionally nodding but otherwise keeping her thoughts to herself until I had finished. "You know, you remind me of myself at your age," she said finally, setting down her teacup. "Different circumstances, but the same pattern. What do you mean?" "I spent the first 4 decades of my life trying to earn love that should have been freely given." She leaned forward slightly. "My late husband was very similar to your mother, always taking, rarely giving, expert at making his happiness my responsibility. It took me 23 years to walk away." "How did you do it?" I asked, surprised by the raw emotion in my own voice. "How did you finally say no?" "With great difficulty," Eleanor admitted. "And only after I realized something crucial. Love that comes with conditions isn't really love at all. It's a transaction." Her words resonated painfully. How many times had my mother's affection been directly tied to my compliance? How often had Rebecca's sisterly warmth appeared only when she needed something. I'm afraid, I confessed. I've built my entire identity around being the responsible one, the provider. If I'm not that person anymore, who am I? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Eleanor's smile was gentle but knowing. Finding out might be the most important work you ever do. She rose and walked to a bookshelf, returning with what appeared to be a business card. This is my son, Martin. He's an attorney who specializes in family law and estate matters. I think you should talk to him. I looked at the card hesitantly. I don't think this is a legal issue. It's just a family disagreement. Humor an old woman, Eleanor said firmly. Something doesn't add up in your story. Your father was a successful investment advisor who died unexpectedly at a relatively young age. There should have been significant assets, life insurance, company shares, retirement accounts. Yet you've been told there was almost nothing? I'd had the same thought the previous night, but hearing someone else articulate it made the inconsistency impossible to ignore. I was young when he died, I said slowly. 22, still in graduate school. Mom handled everything. She said there were business complications, debts I didn't know about. And you've never seen any documentation? No will, no estate paperwork? I shook my head, feeling increasingly uneasy. Mom said Dad's will was simple. Everything went to her. I didn't question it. We were all grieving, and financial details seemed unimportant compared to losing him. Eleanor's expression was compassionate but resolute. Call Martin. At the very least, he can help you understand what documents you have a right to see. Knowledge is power, Olivia, and I suspect you've been kept powerless by being kept in the dark. After leaving Eleanor's house, I returned home and stared at the business card for a long time. Martin Rhodes, Esquire Family Law, Estate Planning, Financial Recovery. The idea of consulting an attorney felt like a drastic escalation, a declaration of war against my own family. Yet Eleanor's questions had awakened doubts that I couldn't easily dismiss. I thought back to the weeks after my father's death. The shock and grief had been overwhelming. My mother had taken control of all practical matters, insisting that I focus on completing my degree. By the time I'd emerged from the worst of my grief, the estate had been settled, the business matters concluded. Whenever I'd asked questions, I'd been given vague answers about complications and reminded that we had to move forward. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number on the card. Rhodes Legal Associates, a professional voice answered. I'd like to make an appointment with Martin Rhodes, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. It's regarding a potential estate issue. Mr. Rhodes has an opening tomorrow at 2 p.m. Would that work for you? Tomorrow, so soon. I thought of my work schedule, the meetings I should attend, the responsibilities waiting for me. Then I thought of 12 years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. Yes, I said, that would be perfect. That evening, I forced myself to review my financial situation objectively. The numbers were sobering. Between the second mortgage I'd taken out to cover Rebecca's husband's business opportunity, the retirement accounts I'd depleted for my mother's condo down payment, and the various loans to family members over the years, I'd given away nearly $450,000, almost $500,000 that I would never see again. At 34, I should have been building wealth and security. Instead, I was essentially starting over financially, with substantial debt and depleted savings. The realization was both terrifying and infuriating. My phone buzzed with yet another message from my mother. Your silence is childish and hurtful. We raised you better than this. We? As if my father would have approved of the financial parasitism that had characterized our family dynamic since his death. The thought stopped me cold. Would he have supported this? The father I remembered had been generous but responsible, kind but fair. Would he really have expected me to sacrifice my own future to maintain my sister's and mother's lifestyles? For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that the narrative I'd been given about my father's wishes and expectations might be as unreliable as the story about his estate. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the manufactured optimism I projected at work or the forced cheerfulness I maintained around my family, but genuine hope that perhaps there was a way forward that didn't require my continued martyrdom. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. Love that comes with conditions isn't really love at all. It's a transaction. If that was true, and my heart recognized the truth in it immediately, then I had never really had the family support I'd convinced myself I had. I'd had a business arrangement disguised as familial love, with terrible terms that I'd never thought to negotiate. Tomorrow, I would begin to renegotiate those terms, starting with understanding exactly what had happened to my father's estate. Martin Rhodes's office was located in a converted Victorian house in the historic district downtown. The building maintained its period charm while housing several professional practices. I arrived 20 minutes early, partly from habit. I was pathologically punctual, and partly from anxiety. As I sat in the tastefully appointed waiting room, doubt began to creep in. What was I doing here? Consulting an attorney about my own family felt like crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. Family business stays within the family. It was one of her favorite maxims, invoked whenever I suggested involving outside professionals in financial matters. The receptionist looked up from her computer. "Mr. Rhodes will see you now, Ms. Bennett." Martin Rhodes was nothing like I'd imagined. Based on Eleanor's age, I'd expected someone in his 50s, but the man who rose to greet me appeared to be in his early 40s. He had Eleanor's perceptive gray eyes and direct manner, but where she was petite, he was tall and broad-shouldered. "Ms. Bennett, please come in," he said, extending his hand. "My mother mentioned you might be calling." I felt a flash of irritation at Eleanor's presumption, quickly followed by gratitude for her concern. "I hope that's not a problem." "Not at all. Mom has excellent instincts about people. If she thought you needed my help, I'm inclined to agree with her assessment." His office was organized but not sterile, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and large windows overlooking a small courtyard garden. He gestured for me to take a seat in one of 2 leather chairs facing his desk. "So," he said once we were settled, "tell me what brings you here today." I found myself hesitating. Saying the words out loud would make this real, would transform vague suspicions into allegations that couldn't be taken back. "Take your time," Martin said, his tone reassuring rather than impatient. "Family financial matters are often complicated by emotions and long-standing dynamics. I'm not even sure where to begin," I admitted, "or if I should be here at all. Why don't we start with the facts as you understand them, and then we can discuss your options? You're not committing to any course of action by having this conversation." His practical approach helped calm my racing thoughts. I started with my father's death 12 years ago, explained what little I knew about his estate, and detailed the financial dynamics that had developed since then. Martin listened attentively, occasionally making notes but mostly maintaining eye contact. "Let me summarize to make sure I understand," he said when I finished. "Your father was a successful investment advisor with his own firm. He died suddenly when you were 22 and still in graduate school. Your mother handled all estate matters and told you that despite his career success, there were complications and debts that essentially depleted the estate. Since then, you've been the primary financial support for both your mother and sister, though both maintain lifestyles that appear beyond what they could afford on their own declared incomes." I nodded, hearing how suspicious it sounded when laid out so concisely. "And you've never seen any documentation related to your father's estate? No will, no trust documents, no accounting of assets?" "No," I admitted. "I was deep in grief and focused on finishing my MBA. Mom said she was handling everything. And your father never discussed his estate plans with you directly? He was in financial services. Most professionals in that field are quite diligent about their own planning. The question triggered a memory I'd almost forgotten. About 6 months before his death, Dad had taken me to lunch after I'd presented a case study in my advanced finance seminar. He'd been impressed with my analysis and more animated than usual. Actually, I said slowly, he did mention something. He said he was proud of how I was handling my education and career, and that he'd taken care of things, so I would always have options. I assumed he meant he was covering my grad school expenses, which he was. But now that I think about it, his tone suggested something more significant. Martin nodded thoughtfully. That aligns with what I would expect from someone in his position. Investment advisors typically have substantial life insurance, business succession plans, and often, trusts for their children. So you think there might have been more to his estate than I was told? I think it warrants investigation, he replied carefully. There are several ways we could approach this. The most direct would be to simply ask your mother for copies of the estate documents, the will, any trust agreements, the probate records. These are public documents, so there's no legal reason you shouldn't have access to them. The thought of confronting my mother directly sent a wave of anxiety through. She won't react well to that request. I suspected as much. The alternative is to search the probate records directly. When someone dies with assets in their name, their will must go through probate, a legal process that validates the will and authorizes the executor to distribute assets according to its terms. Those records are filed with the county where your father resided at the time of his death. He lived in Westlake County. Then that's where we would start. I can have my associate pull those records this afternoon. The efficiency of his response surprised me. That quickly? Probate records are public. It's simply a matter of knowing where to look. He paused, studying my expression. You seem hesitant, Ms. Bennett. May I ask what's holding you back? I struggled to articulate the complex emotions churning through me. What if I'm wrong? What if there really were debts and complications I didn't know about? I'd be investigating my own mother based on nothing but suspicions and the word of a neighbor I barely know. Those are valid concerns, Martin acknowledged. But consider this. If everything was handled properly, the probate records will simply confirm what your mother told you. You'll have peace of mind, and no one needs to know you checked. And if things weren't handled properly, his expression turned serious. Then you'll have information you need to make informed decisions about your financial future and your relationships going forward. Put that way, it seemed foolish not to proceed. Still, something held me back. A lifetime of conditioning to prioritize family harmony above all else, to avoid rocking the boat, to accept the narratives I was given without question. What's the worst thing that could happen if you look into this? Martin asked, seeming to sense my internal conflict. I considered the question seriously. My mother and sister might find out I'm investigating. They would see it as a betrayal of trust. And the worst thing that could happen if you don't look into this? The answer came more quickly than I expected. I could continue sacrificing my financial security for people who might have been lying to me for over a decade. I might never know the truth about what my father intended for me. Martin nodded but remained silent, allowing me to reach my own conclusion. Let's pull the records, I said finally. Excellent. I'll make that request immediately. He made a note in his file. There's something else we should discuss. Depending on what we find, there might be a statute of limitations issue for any potential legal action. What does that mean exactly? If there was improper handling of the estate, there's a time limit for bringing legal action. In most cases, it's between 1 and 5 years from when the executor completes probate. However, and this is important, there are exceptions if fraud was involved, particularly if information was actively concealed from heirs. the clock may not start ticking until the fraud is discovered. The word fraud hung in the air between us. It seemed so harsh, so final, transforming family dysfunction into potential criminality. "I'm not saying that's what happened," Martin clarified, reading my expression. "I'm simply outlining possibilities so you're informed." I nodded, feeling simultaneously relieved to be taking action and terrified of what we might find. "How long will it take to get the records?" "We should have preliminary information by tomorrow. More detailed documents might take a few days. That's much faster than I expected. One benefit of the digital age." He smiled briefly. "Now, while we're waiting for those records, I'd suggest you gather any information you have about your father's business, life insurance, retirement accounts, anything financial from that period. Even passing mentions in family emails might provide useful context." As I left Martin's office, I felt oddly lighter despite the uncertainty ahead. For 12 years, I'd accepted the narrative I'd been given, playing my assigned role without question. Now, I was taking steps to discover the truth, whatever it might be. That evening, I dug through the few boxes of my father's things I'd kept after his death. Most of his personal effects had remained with my mother, but I'd insisted on keeping his collection of first-edition finance books, some family photographs, and a wooden box containing cufflinks and his pilot's license from his college days. At the bottom of one box, I found a leather portfolio I hadn't opened in years. Inside were congratulatory cards from my college graduation, including a handwritten note from my father. The sight of his familiar handwriting brought tears to my eyes. "Olivia," he'd written, "I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become. Your intelligence, determination, and kindness will take you places I can only imagine. I've always believed in providing roots and wings, the security to know you're supported, and the freedom to soar on your own. Both are waiting for you. All my love, Dad." Roots and wings, security and freedom. The words seemed particularly poignant now, as I began to question whether the security he'd intended for me had been deliberately withheld. My phone rang, displaying my mother's number for the 5th time that day. I watched it ring until voicemail picked up, then listened, as the notification appeared. "Olivia, this silence is unacceptable," my mother's voice declared. "Rebecca is devastated by your behavior. I raised you better than this. Call me immediately so we can discuss your return to the family fold. Your absence from Sunday dinner will only create unnecessary gossip." The familiar tactics, guilt, obligation, appearances, that had controlled me for so long now seemed transparent and manipulative. I deleted the message without responding and returned to my search. In another box, I found a holiday card from my father's business partner, Harold Cooper, sent shortly after Dad's death. I'd forgotten Harold entirely, a jovial, bearded man who'd been Dad's friend since college before becoming his business partner. The card contained standard condolences and an offer to help with anything you need. I'd never taken him up on it, assuming my mother was in contact with him regarding business matters. I wondered now if Harold might have information about my father's financial affairs. Finding his contact information would be a project for tomorrow. Tonight, I needed to prepare myself for whatever Martin's investigation might reveal. As I returned the boxes to my closet, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I looked tired, but somehow more present than I had in years, as if parts of me that had been dormant were slowly awakening. The simple act of questioning the narrative I'd been given had already begun to shift something fundamental in my sense of self. Whatever the probate records revealed, I realized I had already crossed a threshold. I was no longer the compliant daughter who accepted her assigned role without question. For better or worse, I had chosen to seek the truth, and that choice itself was transformative. Martin's call came at 10:17 the next morning while I was in a budget meeting at work. Seeing his name on my phone screen sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I excused myself, citing a personal emergency, and took the call in an empty conference room. "Ms. Bennett, we've received the preliminary probate records from Westlake County," he said without preamble. "I think you should come to my office as soon as possible." Something in his tone made my heart race. "Did you find something?" "Yes, but I'd prefer to discuss it in person. How soon can you get here?" I glanced at my watch. "I can be there in 45 minutes. "Good, I'll clear my schedule." I returned to the budget meeting long enough to apologize and explain that I needed to leave for a personal matter. My team looked surprised. I'd never put personal needs before work obligations, but no one questioned me. The perks of seniority, I supposed, or perhaps simply the benefit of having built a reputation for unwavering reliability over the years. As I drove to Martin's office, my mind raced with possibilities. What had he found that warranted an immediate meeting? Would it confirm my growing suspicions, or reveal that I'd been chasing shadows? This time, the receptionist didn't make me wait. She led me directly to Martin's office, where he stood by a table that had been cleared except for several document folders arranged in a neat row. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, gesturing for me to sit across from him. His expression was serious, professional, giving nothing away. "You're making me nervous," I admitted as I took a seat. "I apologize for that. I wanted to ensure you heard this information directly from me, in a private setting." He opened the first folder. "These are the probate records for your father's estate, filed in Westlake County Court in June 2011, approximately 2 months after his death." He slid the documents toward me. At the top was a cover sheet with my father's name, Richard Allen Bennett, his date of death, and the case number. Below that was a summary of assets and their distribution. "Take your time," Martin said quietly. I began to read, and with each line, felt the foundations of what I'd believed for 12 years crumble beneath me. According to the probate records, my father's estate had been substantial. Beyond the family home and his share in the investment firm, there were significant retirement accounts, investment portfolios, and a life insurance policy with a payout of $1.5 million. The total value of the estate exceeded $3.8 million. More shocking than the amount was the distribution. While the family home and certain accounts had indeed gone to my mother as I'd been told, there was a separate trust established specifically for me, valued at just over $2 million. "The Richard Bennett Family Trust," Martin explained, opening a second folder. "Established 5 years before his death, with you named as the primary beneficiary. Your mother was named as the trustee until you reached the age of 30, at which point full control would transfer to you." I was stunned. "I'm 34. I should have had control of this trust for 4 years. "Yes, you should have," Martin agreed grimly. "But according to these records, the trust was substantially modified 3 months after your father's death through a petition filed by your mother as trustee." He slid another document toward me. It was a court filing requesting modification of the trust terms, citing changed circumstances and the beneficiary's lack of financial readiness. The document included an affidavit from my mother stating that I was emotionally unstable following my father's death and financially irresponsible, requiring extended trustee oversight. "This can't be legal," I whispered, hands shaking as I read my mother's sworn statement about my alleged instability and irresponsibility. I was completing my MBA with honors. I was devastated by Dad's death. Yes, but not unstable. "The court apparently found her arguments compelling enough to grant the modification," Martin said. "The amended trust gave her much broader powers. As trustee, including the ability to make distributions to other family members in need, and to extend her control indefinitely if she deemed you financially or emotionally unfit to manage the assets." The betrayal was breathtaking. While I'd been grieving and focusing on completing my education as my father would have wanted, My mother had been actively working to maintain control of assets he had specifically designated for me. "There's more," Martin continued, opening a third folder. "These are the annual accounting statements your mother was required to file with the court as trustee. They show a pattern of distributions beginning about 6 months after your father's death. The statements revealed a methodical draining of the trust, large distributions to my mother for administrative costs and management fees, substantial transfers to Rebecca for educational expenses, despite her having dropped out of college after a single semester, payments for the down payment on her first home, classified as a housing stability investment, tens of thousands for a series of failed business ventures my brother-in-law had undertaken, listed as career development support. Over 12 years, nearly $7 million had been distributed from my trust to my mother and sister. The original $2 million had been reduced to approximately $300,000, primarily through these distributions rather than investment losses. All of this was legally mine?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "According to your father's original trust documents." "Yes. The trust was established specifically for your benefit, with clear instructions about its purpose and distribution timeline." "And I was never notified about any of this? The trust, the modifications, nothing?" Martin's expression was sympathetic, but professional. "According to these filings, you waived your right to notice and accounting." He showed me a document with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom, dated about 3 weeks after my father's death. It was a comprehensive waiver of my rights to be informed about the trust administration, supposedly signed to reduce administrative burden during a time of grief. I stared at the signature. It resembled mine, but something was off. The loops too perfect, the slant slightly wrong. "I didn't sign this," I said firmly. "I've never seen this document before." Martin's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you certain? This was filed with the court." "Absolutely certain. I would remember signing something like this." I pointed to specific elements of the signature. "Look at how the B in Bennett is formed. I never loop it that way. And the O in Olivia is too perfectly round. I always have a slight oval." He studied the signature more closely. "If this is indeed a forgery, it changes the legal landscape significantly. Statute of limitations issues become much less relevant if fraud was committed." "What happens now?" I asked, still struggling to process the magnitude of the deception. "That depends on what you want to happen," Martin replied. "We have several options, ranging from non-confrontational to aggressive legal action." "I need to know exactly what's left in the trust now," I said, trying to think clearly despite the emotional tsunami threatening to overwhelm me. "And I need to understand what my options are for recovering what was taken." Martin nodded approvingly. "A practical approach. First, we can petition the court for a comprehensive accounting of the trust's current assets. As the beneficiary, you have that right regardless of any purported waiver, especially given the apparent forgery." "How long will that take?" "We can file the petition today. Depending on the court's calendar, we could have a response within 2 weeks. And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, I suggest we gather more evidence. We should have the signature on that waiver analyzed by a forensic document examiner. We should also try to locate your father's business partner, Harold Cooper. As his partner, he would likely have knowledge of your father's intentions regarding his estate." I thought of the holiday card I'd found the night before. I might be able to find contact information for Harold. He sent a condolence card after Dad died. "Excellent. Any contemporaneous documents or witnesses from that time would be valuable." Martin hesitated, then continued in a gentler tone. "I should prepare you for what comes next. When we file the petition for accounting, your mother will be notified, as the trustee. This will likely trigger a confrontation you can't avoid." The thought made my stomach clench. but I was beyond the point of turning back. I understand. I need to be ready for that. Would you like some time to process this information before we take any action? I considered his question carefully. Part of me wanted time to absorb the shock, to grieve this new loss. Not of my father this time, but of the family I thought I had. Another part recognized that delay would only give my mother more time to potentially cover her tracks or deplete what remained of my trust. No, I said firmly. I've lost 12 years and nearly $2 million already. I don't want to lose another day. File the petition. Martin nodded, respect evident in his expression. I'll have the papers prepared immediately. We should also discuss securing what remains of the trust assets to prevent any further distributions once your mother receives notice of our petition. For the next hour, we developed a strategic plan. Martin would file an emergency petition to freeze the trust assets pending full accounting. We would request a forensic accounting of all distributions over the 12-year period. I would attempt to locate Harold Cooper and any other potential witnesses to my father's estate planning intentions. As our meeting concluded, Martin handed me his card with his cell phone number handwritten on the back. Call me anytime, day or night, especially after your mother receives the court notice. Family financial disputes can escalate quickly and I want you to have immediate access to counsel if needed. I left his office in a daze, my worldview fundamentally altered. The narrative I'd believed for 12 years, that my father had left little behind, that supporting my family was my filial duty, that my sacrifices were necessary and expected, had been a carefully constructed lie. In the parking lot, I sat, in my car, unable to drive as the emotions I'd held at bay during the meeting finally broke through. Rage, grief, betrayal, they washed over me in overwhelming waves. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and allowed myself to feel it all, to acknowledge the magnitude of what had been taken from me. When the storm finally subsided, I looked up and caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Behind, the redness of my eyes, I saw something unexpected: determination, clarity, purpose. I had spent 12 years being manipulated and exploited by the people who should have protected me. That ended today. I started the car and pulled out my phone. It was time to find Harold Cooper. Finding Harold Cooper proved easier than I anticipated. A quick LinkedIn search revealed that he had remained in the investment industry, now serving as a senior advisor at a wealth management firm across town. His profile photo showed a man in his 60s, the jovial beard I remembered now entirely gray, but his eyes still held the same warmth I recalled from childhood visits to my father's office. I debated how to approach him. A cold call might seem suspicious, an email too easily ignored. After consideration, I decided directness was best. I would visit his office in person. If he refused to see me, I'd be no worse off than before. The next morning, I took another personal day from work, my second in a week after years without any, and drove to the gleaming downtown high-rise that housed Harold's firm. In the elevator, I rehearsed what I would say, trying to formulate questions that would elicit information without revealing how little I actually knew. The reception area of Cooper Wealth Strategies was elegant but approachable, much like my father's old office had been. A young receptionist looked up as I entered. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No, I don't," I admitted. "But I was hoping Mr. Cooper might have a few minutes to see me. I'm Olivia Bennett, Richard Bennett's daughter." Her polite smile faltered for a moment, surprise registering in her eyes before her professional demeanor returned. "Let me check if he's available. Please have a seat." I waited, studying the framed photographs on the walls, Harold receiving industry awards, shaking hands with financial luminaries, and one that made my heart skip. Harold and my father, arms around each other's shoulders, standing in front of their original office building. They looked young, ambitious, proud of what they had built together. "Ms. Bennett?" I turned to see Harold himself standing in the doorway to the inner office. his expression a mixture of shock and something else. Concern, perhaps even guilt. He looked older than his LinkedIn photo, the lines around his eyes deeper, his posture slightly stooped. "Mr. Cooper, thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "Of course," he said quickly. "Please come back to my office." He led me down a hallway to a corner office with spectacular views of the city skyline. Unlike the reception area, his personal space was cluttered with memorabilia, books, and family photos, including, I noticed with a pang, several that included my father. "Sit, please." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "This is unexpected, a pleasant surprise." There was tension beneath his welcoming words, a wariness that strengthened my suspicion that he knew more than I did about my father's estate. "I apologize for dropping in unannounced," I said, deciding that straightforward honesty was my best approach. "I'm here because I've recently discovered some concerning information about my father's estate, and I believe you might be able to help me understand what happened." Harold's face paled visibly. He reached for a glass of water on his desk, taking a deliberate sip before responding. "I see. What specifically are you wondering about?" "I've learned that my father established a trust in my name, with assets of approximately $2 million. I was never informed of this trust's existence, despite being the primary beneficiary. Over the past 12 years, nearly 85% of those assets have been distributed to my mother and sister, contrary to what I believe were my father's intentions." Harold closed his eyes briefly, a pained expression crossing his face. When he opened them, his gaze was direct and filled with regret. "I was afraid of this," he said quietly. "I suspected something wasn't right, but I had no legal standing to intervene." "You knew about the trust?" "Of course, I helped Richard set it up." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Your father was meticulous about his estate planning. The trust was designed to provide for your education and give you financial independence to pursue whatever career you chose without pressure or limitation. Then why didn't you say anything when it was modified after his death? The court records show my mother petitioned for almost complete control 3 months after he died." Harold sighed heavily. "I did try, Olivia. I contacted your mother repeatedly in the months after Richard's death, offering to assist with the business transition and estate matters. She rebuffed every attempt, saying the family needed privacy to grieve. When I persisted, she threatened legal action, claiming I was harassing a widow." He pulled open a desk drawer and removed a leather portfolio, showing signs of age. "I've kept these all these years, hoping someday you might come looking for answers." Inside were copies of emails between Harold and my mother, dating back to the weeks following my father's death. The communication showed exactly what he'd described: his increasing concern about the handling of the estate, her increasingly hostile responses. "I also tried to reach out to you directly," he continued. "I sent cards, left messages. When those went unanswered, I assumed you preferred not to have contact with your father's business associates. I should have tried harder, found another way to reach you." I remembered the holiday card I'd found, the only communication from him I'd ever received. "I never got any messages from you, just one condolence card. My mother must have intercepted everything else." Harold's expression darkened. "That doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. Catherine was controlling, even when Richard was alive. He loved her, but he was also realistic about her tendencies. That's why he structured his estate the way he did, to ensure you would be provided for independently of her. You mentioned you helped him set up the trust. Do you have any documentation about his intentions?" Harold nodded, turning to filing cabinet behind his desk. "I kept copies of everything, against my attorney's advice. Legally, after Richard's death and the business buyout, I had no right to these documents. But something felt wrong about how Catherine was handling things, and I couldn't bring myself to discard them." He withdrew a thick folder and placed it carefully on the desk between us. These are copies of the original trust documents, correspondence with the estate attorney, and notes from our planning meetings. Richard was absolutely clear about his intentions for your financial future. I opened the folder with trembling hands. On top was a letter, handwritten on my father's personal stationery, addressed to me. "My dearest Olivia," it began, "if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and Harold has determined you need to understand my intentions for your future. I've established the Richard Bennett Family Trust to ensure that you will always have the freedom to make life choices based on your passions and principles, not financial necessity. Your mother will oversee these assets until you turn 30, at which point they transfer fully to your control. This is my gift to you, not just financial security, but the liberty to define success on your own terms. All my love, Dad." Tears blurred my vision as I read his words. This was my father's true voice, his genuine wish for my future. So different from the narrative I'd been fed about obligation and family duty. "He never intended for me to support them," I said. The realization, both painful and liberating. "He wanted me to be free, financially independent," Harold confirmed. Richard believed strongly that children should be empowered, not burdened by family obligations. He and I had similar philosophies about legacy planning. I continued through the documents, finding detailed notes about the trust's structure, investment guidelines, and distribution rules. One section stood out starkly. Under no circumstances should the trust assets be used to support Catherine or Rebecca's lifestyle expenses. Separate provisions have been made for them through life insurance and other accounts. "My mother and sister were already provided for," I said, the betrayal cutting even deeper. "They didn't need my trust funds. Catherine received the family, home free and clear, a life insurance payout of $1, $5 million, and Richard's personal investment accounts valued at approximately $800,000, Harold confirmed. Rebecca had a separate college fund of $150,000. Neither should have needed additional support. The magnitude of the deception was staggering. Not only had my mother concealed my inheritance, but she had done so while already financially secure, herself. "Why?" I asked, the question directed more to the universe than to Harold. Why take what was meant for me when they already had so much? Harold's response was measured, compassionate but unflinching. "I've known your mother for over 30 years, Olivia. Catherine has always feared financial insecurity and craved control. Richard balanced those tendencies while he was alive, without his moderating influence." He trailed off, then continued more directly. "Some people can never have enough security, enough control. It's a void that can't be filled, no matter how much they acquire." I thought of my mother's persistent anxiety about money despite her comfortable lifestyle, her constant monitoring of my financial decisions, her anger whenever I made purchases for myself instead of contributing to family expenses. What I had interpreted as prudent financial management now revealed itself as something darker, a pathological need for control disguised as maternal concern. "I need your help, Harold," I said, resolve strengthening my voice. "I've retained an attorney and filed a petition for accounting of the trust. But these documents, your testimony about my father's intentions, could be crucial to recovering what remains and possibly some of what was improperly distributed." Harold didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need. I should have done more years ago, but I'm here now. Richard was like a brother to me, and I failed to protect his legacy as I promised." His voice cracked slightly on the last words. "You didn't fail," I assured him. "You kept these records. You tried to reach out. And now you're helping me understand the truth." For the next 2 hours, Harold and I reviewed the documents, identifying key evidence of my father's intentions and my mother's subsequent actions to circumvent them. He agreed to provide a sworn affidavit about the trust's establishment and purpose, and to testify in court if necessary. As our meeting concluded, Harold walked me to the elevator, then hesitated. "There's something else you should know, Olivia. Your father was immensely proud of you. Your intelligence, your integrity, your determination. He used to bring your school papers to the office, show everyone your achievements. The trust wasn't just about money for him. It was about believing in your potential to do remarkable things if given the freedom to choose your path." His words touched something deep within me, a connection to my father I had feared was fading with time. "Thank you for telling me that." "One more thing," Harold added, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small key. "This opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank downtown, Box 247. Richard maintained it separately from family accounts. He mentioned once that he kept items there he wanted to ensure you would receive, regardless of other estate matters. I don't know what's inside, but the box should still be active. As his business partner, I'm listed as a secondary signatory, so I can accompany you if you wish to access it." The existence of a separate safe deposit box, unknown to my mother, suggested my father had anticipated potential complications. Had he suspected she might not honor his wishes? The thought was painful but increasingly plausible. "Can we go there now?" I asked, my curiosity overwhelming. Harold checked his watch. "My afternoon is clear. The bank is only 3 blocks from here." 20 minutes later, we stood in a private viewing room at First National Bank as a manager unlocked Box 247 and left us to examine its contents. The box contained several items: a smaller jewelry box, a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting, and a USB drive labeled Olivia, 30th birthday. "I'll give you privacy," Harold said, stepping toward the door. "No. Please stay," I replied. "I might need context for whatever this is." I opened the jewelry box first. Inside was my grandmother's sapphire ring, which I had assumed was lost years ago when my mother claimed to have sent it for cleaning and reported it stolen in transit. Alongside it was a note in my father's hand. "For Olivia on her wedding day. Family legacy that should never be sold or given away." Next, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, dated just 1 month before his death, and several legal documents. "My dearest Olivia," the letter began, "I'm placing these items in safekeeping as a precaution. While I hope your mother will honor the provisions I've made, for your future, experience has taught me to prepare for all contingencies. In this envelope, you'll find a secondary copy of your trust documentation, contact information for my attorneys, and instructions for accessing certain accounts should the need arise. The USB drive contains video recordings of our estate planning discussions, which establish clear evidence of my intentions for your inheritance. I pray these precautions prove unnecessary, but as I've always taught you, hope for the best, but plan for the contingencies. All my love, Dad." I looked up at Harold, who appeared equally stunned by my father's foresight. "He knew," I whispered. "He anticipated she might try to circumvent his wishes." "Richard was insightful about people, even those he loved," Harold said gently. "And he was always thorough in his planning. This doesn't mean he didn't love Catherine, just that he understood her limitations." As I carefully returned the items to the box, keeping only the legal documents and USB drive for immediate use, I felt a profound shift in my understanding of both my parents. My father had been not just loving, but protective, anticipating threats to my well-being even after his death. My mother's betrayal, while devastating, had not been entirely unexpected by him. He had left breadcrumbs for me to follow when I was ready to discover the truth. "Harold," I said as we left the bank, the evidence secured in my briefcase, "thank you for keeping faith all these years, for being here when I finally came looking for answers." He squeezed my shoulder gently. "Richard would be proud of you for asking the difficult questions, for seeking the truth. That courage comes from him. As we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a genuine connection to my father that transcended memory and time. He had planned not just for my financial security, but for my eventual discovery of the truth. He had believed in me enough to leave the tools I would need to reclaim my inheritance when the time came. For 12 years, I had carried the weight of imagined obligations, sacrificing my own future to fulfill what I believed were my father's wishes. Now I understood that the greatest betrayal of his legacy wasn't my newfound resistance to supporting my mother and sister, but the years I had spent allowing myself to be exploited in his name. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, the USB drive from my father's safe deposit box connected to my laptop. My finger hovered over the play button, both eager and hesitant to see my father's face, to hear his voice after so many years. Finally, I pressed play. The video began with my father sitting in his home office, the bookshelves I remembered so well visible behind him. He looked healthy, vibrant, exactly as I remembered him, but seeing him move and speak after 12 years of still photographs was overwhelming. "Hello, Olivia," he began, his familiar voice sending a wave of emotion through me. "If you're watching this, you've reached your 30th birthday, and it's time for you to take full control of your trust. I've recorded this to explain my intentions, personally, so there can be no misunderstanding." He proceeded to outline in meticulous detail the structure of the trust, the reasoning behind it, and his explicit instructions regarding distributions. He specifically addressed potential scenarios, including one that sent a chill through me. If, for some reason, you're viewing this and have not been informed about the trust previously, or if the assets have been managed contrary to my stated intentions, I've prepared contingency documentation. Contact Harold Cooper immediately. He has copies of everything and instructions to assist you. The video continued for nearly 40 minutes, with my father explaining investment principles, distribution guidelines, and his hope that the trust would provide me with options, the freedom to take risks, to pursue meaningful work rather than merely profitable work, to make choices based on your values rather than financial necessity. Near the end, his tone became more personal. "I'm proud of you, Olivia. Your intelligence, your integrity, your compassion, these are your true inheritance, far more valuable than any financial assets I can leave you. This trust is simply a tool to help those qualities flourish without constraint. Use it wisely, but remember that its purpose is to expand your freedom, not restrict it." He smiled then, the warm smile I'd missed for 12 years. "I love you, sweetheart. Always have, always will." The screen went dark, but I remained motionless, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just the confirmation of my suspicions or the evidence that would help my legal case. It was the reconnection with my father's voice, his wisdom, his love, a presence I had feared was fading from my memory with each passing year. After composing myself, I watched the remaining videos on the drive. There were 5 in total, including recordings of meetings with the estate attorney where my father explicitly stated that my mother was to serve as trustee only until I turned 30, at which point full control would transfer to me automatically. In one especially damning clip, the attorney asked about provisions for my mother and sister, and my father clearly stated that they were provided for separately, and the trust was exclusively for my benefit. I immediately sent copies of the videos to Martin Rhodes, along with the documents from the safe deposit box. His response came within the hour. "This changes everything. The videos provide irrefutable evidence of your father's intentions. I'm filing an emergency motion first thing tomorrow morning. Get some rest. Things are about to move quickly." Sleep was impossible. I spent the night reviewing the trust documents, comparing the original provisions with the modifications my mother had implemented after my father's death. The contrast was stark and devastating. What had been designed as a vehicle for my independence had been perverted into a resource for my mother and sister's lifestyle maintenance, with me deliberately kept ignorant of its existence. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolute. I arrived at Martin's office just as it opened, bringing the original documents from the safe deposit box. He was waiting for me, his expression more animated than I'd seen previously. "Judge Harlow has granted our emergency motion," he announced as soon as I entered his office. "The trust assets are frozen, and your mother has been ordered to appear for a hearing 3 days from now. She's also required to produce all trust records and account statements within 24 hours. That quickly? I was surprised by the speed of the legal response. Judge Harlow takes trustee malfeasance very seriously. The evidence from your father's videos was compelling enough for immediate action." Martin looked genuinely pleased. "This is a significant first victory, Olivia. The court is taking the matter seriously. What happens at the hearing?" "Your mother will need to explain the discrepancies between the original trust provisions and her actions as trustee. The judge will likely appoint a forensic accountant to review all trust transactions. Most importantly, based on the evidence we've presented, the court may remove your mother as trustee immediately." The thought of facing my mother in court was daunting, but necessary. "Will I need to testify?" "Yes, but you'll be well prepared. We'll go through potential questions and practice your responses beforehand." As we discussed the hearing preparations, Martin's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he turned to me with raised eyebrows. "That was your mother's attorney. They've requested an immediate settlement conference." "Already?" "The emergency order was just issued this morning. It appears the documentation we submitted with our motion made quite an impression." Martin's tone was measured but satisfied. "They're proposing a meeting today at 2 p.m. The swiftness of the response suggested panic. Exactly what one might expect from someone whose long-standing deception was suddenly exposed. "Should we agree to meet?" I asked. "Absolutely. Settlement discussions don't preclude us from proceeding with the hearing, but they might provide insight into your mother's strategy. At minimum, it signals they recognize the strength of our position." 5 hours later, I sat beside Martin in a conference room at his firm. Across the table, my mother looked smaller than I remembered, her carefully maintained appearance showing signs of strain. Beside her sat a sharp-featured woman in an impeccable suit who introduced herself as Diane Lowell, her attorney. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared at the table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. I had expected anger, defensiveness, not this apparent defeat. "Let's get straight to the point," Diane began. "My client acknowledges there have been irregularities in the administration of the Bennett Family Trust. We're prepared to offer immediate corrective action to resolve this matter without protracted litigation." Martin maintained a neutral expression. "We're listening." "Mrs. Bennett will resign as trustee effective immediately. She will provide a complete accounting of all trust transactions and cooperate fully with an independent audit. She also proposes to restore the trust with a payment of $500,000 from her personal assets as partial compensation for improper distributions. $500,000, a substantial offer, but far less than what had been taken. Before Martin could respond, I leaned forward. "That's all?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "After systematically draining nearly $1, $7 million from a trust my father established for my benefit? After forging my signature on waiver documents? After lying to me for 12 years while I struggled financially to support the family?" Mother flinched but remained silent, leaving her attorney to respond. "Mrs. Bennett's ability to make restitution is limited by her current financial situation," Diane stated. "The $500,000 represents a significant portion of her remaining assets. What happened to the $5 million life insurance payment? The $800,000 in personal investment accounts?" I pressed, drawing on the information Harold had provided. My mother's head snapped up, surprise evident in her expression. "How did you—" Richard Bennett's business partner has provided extensive documentation about the estate, Martin interjected, smoothly. We have a comprehensive understanding of the assets distributed following Mr. Bennett's death. Diane conferred quietly with my mother, their whispered exchange tense. Finally, she turned back to us. My client is prepared to increase the restitution to $800,000, with $300,000 payable immediately and the balance over 3 years. Additionally, she will transfer ownership of her condominium to the trust. The combined value represents approximately $4 million. The offer was more substantial, but still fell short of full restitution. Moreover, it addressed only the financial aspects, not the years of deception and manipulation. And my sister? I asked. She received substantial distributions from my trust as well. Rebecca Bennett is not party to this settlement discussion, Diane replied stiffly. My client cannot speak to her daughter's willingness or ability to make restitution. I glanced at Martin, who gave a subtle nod, indicating the offer warranted consideration. We requested a brief recess to confer privately. In a smaller adjacent room, Martin laid out the pros and cons. The revised offer represents approximately 82% of the misappropriated assets, which is better than many settlements in similar cases. We could potentially recover more through litigation, but that process would take years and involve significant legal costs and emotional toll. It's not just about the money, I said. It's about accountability, about acknowledging what they did. I understand. What specifically would make this settlement acceptable to you, beyond the financial terms? I considered the question carefully. I want a written acknowledgement of what happened, not just irregularities, but an admission that my mother deliberately concealed the trust's existence and misappropriated funds intended for me. I want her to admit to forging my signature on the waiver documents. And I want some protection against my sister attempting to extract more money from me in the future under the guise of family obligation. Martin nodded thoughtfully. All reasonable conditions that we can incorporate into a settlement agreement. The admission of forgery is particularly important, as it constitutes criminal fraud. Including that admission gives you significant leverage against future demands. When we returned to the conference room, Martin presented my conditions clearly and firmly. My mother blanched at the requirement for a written admission, particularly regarding the forgery. That could have serious repercussions, Diane objected. We're discussing a family matter, not criminal proceedings. Forgery of legal documents is inherently criminal, Martin countered. The admission remains non-negotiable. Without it, we proceed to the hearing and request a full forensic audit and investigation, including potential referral to the district attorney's office. The implicit threat hung in the air. After another whispered conference, Diane nodded reluctantly. My client will provide the written acknowledgement as requested, with the understanding that Ms. Bennett will not independently pursue criminal charges based on that admission. I looked directly at my mother, who finally met my gaze. The defiance I had expected was absent, replaced by something that appeared almost like relief. For 12 years, she had maintained an elaborate deception, expending enormous energy to preserve the facade. Perhaps on some level, she welcomed its collapse. We have a preliminary agreement, Martin declared. My office will draft the settlement documents for review by close of business tomorrow. Pending final approval of those documents, we'll request a continuance of the hearing scheduled for Thursday. As the meeting concluded, my mother stood to leave, then hesitated. Olivia, she began, her voice uncertain. I know you won't believe this, but I thought I was protecting you. The money. You weren't ready for that kind of responsibility right after your father died. You were so fragile. The justification was so transparently false, so contrary to the documented evidence of her actions, that I felt no anger, only a profound sadness for the mother I had thought I had, and the relationship that had been built on manipulation rather than love. "We'll communicate through our attorneys," I replied quietly, turning away. As the door closed behind her, I experienced not the vindication I had expected, but a complex mixture of relief, grief, and something unexpected: freedom. The weight of perceived obligation that had shaped my adult life was lifting, revealing possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider. "Congratulations," Martin said, gathering his notes. "This is a significant victory, not just financially, but in establishing boundaries and accountability. What are you feeling?" I considered the question seriously, like I'm waking up from a very long sleep, like I'm meeting myself for the first time in 12 years. He nodded understandingly. "That's a common response when someone breaks free from long-term manipulation. The journey doesn't end with this settlement, but it marks a crucial turning point." As I left his office that afternoon, I felt fundamentally changed. The Olivia who had entered that restaurant a week ago, compliant, guilt-ridden, defined by family expectations, was fading. In her place was emerging someone new, someone whose boundaries mattered, whose dreams deserved pursuit, whose life belonged to herself alone. The first victory wasn't just the freezing of trust assets or the settlement agreement. It was the reclamation of my autonomy, the first step toward the future my father had actually envisioned for me, one built on freedom rather than obligation. The settlement agreement was finalized within a week. True to her word, my mother transferred $300,000 to the trust immediately and signed over the deed to her condominium. She also provided a notarized statement acknowledging that she had deliberately concealed the trust's existence, forged my signature on waiver documents, and systematically diverted funds intended for my benefit to herself and Rebecca. The document was devastating in its stark admissions, but necessary for my protection going forward. With Martin's guidance, I established new governance for the trust. A professional trustee from a respected financial institution would manage the assets until the remaining payments from my mother were complete, at which point the trust would dissolve and all assets would transfer directly to my ownership. The arrangement provided security while giving me time to educate myself about wealth management. As the dust began to settle on the legal proceedings, I turned my attention to an equally important task: rebuilding my life according to my own values and ambitions, free from the financial burdens and manipulative dynamics that had constrained me for so long. The first step was addressing my work situation. For years, I had pursued advancement relentlessly, working longer hours than anyone else, accepting every demanding project, sacrificing weekends and vacations, all to maximize my income to support my family. With that obligation lifted, I realized I needed to reassess my relationship with my career. I scheduled a meeting with my direct supervisor, Elaine Peterson, the chief operations officer who had been my mentor since I joined Meridian Tech. "I've been expecting this conversation," Elaine said as I entered her office. "You've taken more personal days in the past 2 weeks than in the previous 5 years combined. Something significant is clearly happening in your life." I had always maintained strict boundaries between my personal and professional lives, sharing little beyond superficial details with colleagues. But Elaine had shown me consistent support and genuine concern throughout my career. If anyone deserved an explanation, it was her. "I've been dealing with a family financial situation," I began carefully. "It's been resolved now, but the process has prompted me to reconsider certain aspects of my life, including my work-life balance." Elaine nodded thoughtfully. "You've been running at an unsustainable pace for years, Olivia. I've admired your dedication but worried about the toll it was taking. I'd like to propose some changes," I continued. "I'm not looking to step back from my responsibilities, but I would like to establish more reasonable boundaries. Regular hours, actual weekends off, the vacation time I'm entitled to. I believe I can maintain my performance and results while creating a healthier relationship With my work, I expected resistance. Corporate culture often celebrated overwork and self-sacrifice. But Elaine surprised me. "Finally," she said with a smile. "I've been hoping you'd have this realization before you burned out completely. Your value to this company isn't measured by how many hours you work, but by your exceptional judgment, strategic thinking, and leadership. Working yourself to exhaustion diminishes those qualities." The conversation shifted to practical adjustments. Delegating certain tasks to my team members, establishing clearer priorities, implementing systems that didn't require my constant oversight. By the end of our meeting, we had developed a plan that would maintain my effectiveness while reclaiming significant personal time. "May I offer a personal observation?" Elaine asked as I prepared to leave. "Of course. You seem different, more present, more centered. Whatever resolution you've reached in your personal situation, it appears to have been transformative." Her perception was accurate. The weight that had been lifted wasn't just financial but psychological. The constant anxiety about meeting family demands, the guilt whenever I considered my own needs, the fear of disappointing people who I now realized had deliberately exploited. I've discovered some difficult truths," I acknowledged, "but necessary ones." "Truth has that quality," Elaine replied. "Painful in the moment, but liberating in the long run." With my professional boundaries established, I turned my attention to my living situation. My modest home had been chosen primarily for its affordability, allowing me to direct the majority of my income to family support. Now, with restored financial resources and reduced obligations, I could reconsider what kind of environment would truly nurture me. After careful reflection, I decided against an immediate move. My small bungalow, while modest, had good bones and was located in a neighborhood I genuinely enjoyed. Rather than rushing to upgrade to a larger or more prestigious property, I would invest in transforming my existing space into a true sanctuary. I hired an architect specializing in residential renovations, explaining that I wanted to create a home that reflected my personality and supported my well-being. Together, we developed plans for a complete transformation, opening the layout to create better flow, adding windows to maximize natural light, converting the rarely used second bedroom into a combination library and meditation space, and extending the back of the house to create a proper kitchen where I could explore my long-neglected interest in cooking. "This is more than a renovation," the architect observed as we finalized the plans. "It's a reclamation." Her comment struck me as profoundly accurate. I wasn't just changing my physical space but making a statement about my right to create an environment that nourished rather than merely sheltered me. With work and home matters in progress, I faced perhaps the most challenging aspect of my new beginning: relationships. During the years of financial support, I had gradually isolated myself socially. Friends had fallen away as I consistently declined invitations due to work commitments or family obligations. Dating had seemed an impossible luxury of time and emotional energy I couldn't afford. Eleanor Rhodes, my neighbor who had first directed me to Martin, became an unexpected source of guidance in this area. "Rebuilding a social life in your 30s isn't easy," she acknowledged as we shared tea in her garden. "But it's entirely possible if approached with intention rather than desperation." "I'm not even sure where to begin," I admitted. "I've been so focused on work and family responsibilities for so long, I've lost touch with who I am socially." "Start with interests rather than people," Eleanor advised. "What activities or subjects genuinely engage you? What have you always wanted to explore but never allowed yourself the time or resources to pursue?" The question required serious reflection. What did interest me, separate from obligations and expectations? I had been defined by my responsibilities for so long that my own preferences and passions had faded into background noise, acknowledged but never prioritized. After several days of contemplation, I identified 3 areas I wanted to explore: photography, which had been a casual interest in college before time constraints forced me to abandon it. Hiking and outdoor activities, which offered both physical benefits and connection with nature. And community service, particularly mentoring young women in business and finance. Eleanor's advice proved invaluable. By focusing on activities rather than socializing for its own sake, I found myself naturally connecting with like-minded individuals in contexts that already provided common ground. I joined a local photography club that organized weekend excursions to capture landscapes and urban scenes. The shared creative pursuit created easy conversation and genuine appreciation for each other's perspectives. Through the club, I met Sophia, a graphic designer whose warmth and humor quickly made her a close friend. I volunteered with a nonprofit that provided business education and mentoring to women from disadvantaged backgrounds. The work was deeply fulfilling, allowing me to transform my hard-won professional expertise into a resource for others. More unexpectedly, it connected me with other volunteers, successful professionals who valued service and shared my commitment to creating opportunity for others. Among these volunteers was Daniel, an investment advisor whose thoughtful approach to both finance and life intrigued me. Our conversations after mentoring sessions gradually extended to coffee meetings and, eventually, dinner, my first date in nearly 5 years. Unlike my previous relationships, rushed and compartmentalized between work demands, this connection developed at a natural pace, with space for authentic discovery of each other. 3 months after the settlement with my mother, I realized that momentum was building in every area of my life. Work had become more satisfying as I established healthier boundaries. My home renovation was progressing, with each completed phase bringing me joy and a sense of genuine ownership. New friendships were flourishing, and the possibility of romantic connection had re-entered my life without the pressure and scarcity mentality that had characterized my previous attempts at relationships. Most significantly, I was developing a new relationship with myself, one based on self-respect rather than self-sacrifice, on possibility rather than limitation. The financial resources recovered from the trust-provided security, but the real transformation came from recognizing my intrinsic worth, separate from what I could provide to others. This recognition extended to my changing perspective on family itself. The legal settlement had formally ended my financial relationship with my mother, but the emotional separation required ongoing internal work. Through regular sessions with Dr. Meredith Chen, a therapist specializing in family trauma, I began to understand the dynamics that had shaped our relationship long before my father's death. What you're describing bears hallmarks of narcissistic family systems, Dr. Chen explained during one particularly insightful session. Your mother appears to have viewed you primarily as an extension of herself and a resource for meeting her needs, while your sister was cast as the perpetual, needy child requiring protection and indulgence. But why? I asked. Why create these distinct roles? Such systems typically serve the emotional needs of the parent rather than the children, she replied. The responsible child provides validation through achievement and support, while the needy child ensures the parent feels perpetually necessary and important. Neither role allows for authentic development. This framework helped me understand why Rebecca had been encouraged to remain dependent while I was pushed toward achievement, but never allowed true independence, why financial success was expected of me, but only so its fruits could be redirected to the family. The pattern had been established long before my father's death. His absence had simply removed the moderating influence that had kept it in check. Understanding didn't immediately heal the wounds of betrayal, but it helped me contextualize what had happened. The exploitation hadn't been personal in the sense of targeted malice, but reflected deep dysfunctional patterns that would have been directed at anyone in my position. This realization, while not excusing my mother's actions, helped me begin to release the confusion and self-doubt that had plagued me. Healing doesn't require reconciliation, Dr. Chen reminded me when I expressed guilt about maintaining distance from my mother and sister. Some relationships can be repaired after harm, others cannot, either because the harm is too severe or because the other party remains unwilling to acknowledge responsibility. Your obligation is to your own well-being, not to maintaining relationships that continue to damage you. As summer turned to fall, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of alignment. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, my external circumstances reflected my internal values. My work produced value without consuming my identity. My home nurtured rather than merely housed me. My relationships were chosen rather than inherited or dictated by obligation. Most importantly, I was beginning to recognize the person my father had seen and believed in, someone capable of defining success on her own terms, of making choices based on authentic desires rather than external expectations. The financial inheritance he had left me was substantial, but his true legacy was the vision of possibility he had held for my life, a vision I was finally free to pursue. 6 months after the settlement, life had settled into a new rhythm that felt both natural and extraordinary. My home renovation was complete, transforming my modest bungalow into a space that truly reflected my personality. Open, warm, and thoughtfully designed. My restructured work arrangement had not only maintained my effectiveness but actually enhanced it. With proper boundaries and regular rest, my strategic thinking and leadership had improved noticeably. My growing circle of friends and my tentative but promising relationship with Daniel added dimensions to my life that had been missing for years. Even my sessions with Dr. Chen had shifted from crisis management to deeper exploration of my authentic values and aspirations. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly, perhaps too smoothly. The unexpected challenge arrived on a crisp October morning in the form of a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Olivia, it's Rebecca. We need to talk. It's urgent, please." My first instinct was to ignore it. The settlement agreement had specifically included provisions preventing both my mother and sister from making future financial claims against me. I had not spoken to either of them since the legal proceedings concluded, a clean break that Dr. Chen had supported as necessary for my healing. Yet something about the message's brevity and uncharacteristic politeness gave me pause. My sister had never used the word please in our adult interactions. Against my better judgment, I replied, "What's this regarding?" The response came immediately. "Mom is in the hospital. Stroke. It's bad. Memorial Hospital, 4th floor." My emotions were chaotic, concern mingled with suspicion, genuine worry complicated by years of manipulation and betrayal. Was this another tactic to reestablish contact and eventually financial support? Or was it a legitimate medical emergency? I called Daniel, who had become my most trusted confidant over the past months. It could be true, or it could be manipulation, he acknowledged after I explained the situation. The question is, what would give you peace of mind either way? His framing helped clarify my thinking. If I ignored the message and it was legitimate, I might later regret not having the opportunity to achieve some kind of closure with my mother. If I responded and it was manipulation, I had the strength and boundaries now to recognize and reject it. "I think I need to verify whether she's actually hospitalized," I decided. "That's reasonable," Daniel replied. "Would you like me to come with you?" His offer touched me deeply. "No, but thank you. This is something I need to handle myself." An hour later, I walked through the sliding doors of Memorial Hospital, my heart racing despite my attempts at calm detachment. At the information desk, I inquired about Catherine Bennett and received confirmation that she had indeed been admitted the previous evening following a stroke. She was in the neurological intensive care unit. As I rode the elevator to the 4th floor, I rehearsed protective mantras Dr. Chen had helped me develop. I am in control of my boundaries. I am not responsible for others' emotions or situations. I can be compassionate without compromising my well-being. The NICU waiting area was eerily quiet, with just a few people scattered across the uncomfortable chairs. Rebecca sat alone in a corner, her appearance shocking me momentarily. Always meticulous about her appearance, she looked disheveled and exhausted, her designer clothes rumpled as if she'd slept in them. She looked up as I approached, surprise and something like relief crossing her face. "You came." "I wanted to verify Mom's condition for myself," I replied, maintaining a careful emotional distance. Rebecca nodded, seemingly too tired for her usual dramatics. "The doctors say it was a major ischemic stroke. She was alone when it happened. A neighbor found her when she didn't answer her door for a package delivery. They don't know how long. She was unconscious before help arrived." The clinical details helped me maintain composure. "What's her prognosis?" "Uncertain. The next 48 hours are critical. If she regains consciousness, she'll likely have significant physical disabilities. Possibly cognitive impairment, too." Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. "They asked about advanced directives, whether she would want to be on life support if things worsen." I sat down, leaving an empty chair between us. "Does she have those documents in place?" "I don't know." Rebecca looked genuinely helpless, an expression I had rarely seen on her usually confident face. After everything with the trust and the settlement, she kind of shut down. Barely communicated with me for months. I don't know what arrangements she made. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of my mother controlling family narratives and decisions, her medical crisis had created a situation where critical information was missing. The very secretiveness that had characterized her handling of my father's estate now complicated her own care. "Have you contacted her attorney?" I asked. Rebecca shook her head. "I didn't think of that." Of course she hadn't. In our family system, practical problem-solving had always been my assigned role, while Rebecca was permitted emotional reactions without responsibility for solutions. The familiar dynamic threatened to reassert itself, but I resisted the old pattern. "I suggest you call Diane Lowell's office," I said, referring to our mother's attorney. "She would likely have copies of any advance directives or healthcare power of attorney documents." Rebecca nodded, then hesitated. Would you talk to the doctors? They explain things so technically, and you've always been better at understanding that kind of information." The request seemed reasonable enough, but I recognized it as the thin edge of a wedge, the beginning of responsibility transfer that could easily expand beyond this specific situation. Carefully maintaining my boundaries, I replied, "I'll speak with them once, to get a clear understanding of the situation. After that, you should establish a relationship with her medical team directly." The doctor, a neurology specialist named Dr. Patel, confirmed Rebecca's summary of our mother's condition. The stroke had been severe, affecting a significant portion of the left hemisphere. The next 48 hours would indeed be critical for survival, and even with the best outcome, extensive rehabilitation would be necessary. "Does either of you have healthcare power of attorney?" Dr. Patel asked. "We're looking into that," I replied. "In the meantime, what are the immediate decisions that need to be made?" "Currently, we're following standard protocols for her condition. If her situation deteriorates, decisions about escalation of interventions would become necessary. It would be helpful to know her wishes as soon as possible." I thanked him for the information and returned to the waiting area, where Rebecca was ending a phone call, her expression troubled. "That was Diane's assistant," she said. "Mom does have healthcare documents, but—" She trailed off, seeming reluctant to continue. "But what?" "She named you as her healthcare proxy, not me." The revelation stunned me. After all that had happened, the betrayal, the legal confrontation, the formal separation of our financial lives, my mother had still designated me to make her medical decisions if she became incapacitated. "When was this done?" I asked, suspicious that it might be an old document predating our conflict. 3 weeks ago," Rebecca replied. After the settlement was finalized, Diane's sending the documents now. The timing made the designation even more bewildering. My mother had chosen me as her healthcare decision-maker after I had exposed her deception and forced legal accountability. Either she trusted my judgment despite our conflict, or this was some final manipulation, a way to burden me with responsibility and potentially guilt. The healthcare directive arrived by email within the hour. It was indeed recently created and explicitly named me as healthcare proxy with full decision-making authority. More surprisingly, it contained detailed instructions about my mother's wishes. No prolonged life support if recovery was unlikely. Comfort measures only if permanent cognitive impairment was expected. Specific limitations on interventions based on prognosis scenarios. The document concluded with a personal note. Olivia has always demonstrated sound judgment, even when I disagreed with her decisions. I trust her to honor these wishes without being swayed by guilt or false hope. I stared at the screen, unsure how to process this strange vote of confidence from a woman who had systematically betrayed my trust for over a decade. Was this acknowledgement of my integrity? A backhanded compliment comparing my reliability to Rebecca's emotional volatility? Or something more complex, a recognition of qualities my mother might have privately respected even while exploiting them? Whatever her intentions, the responsibility was now legally mine. Over the next 2 days, I consulted with Dr. Patel and other specialists about treatment options and prognosis, shared the information with Rebecca as transparently as possible, and prepared myself for potentially difficult decisions. On the third morning, the situation clarified itself in unexpected ways. I arrived at the hospital to find Rebecca in conversation with Dr. Patel, who turned to me with cautious optimism. "Your mother showed signs of consciousness early this morning," he explained. "She's not fully awake, but she's responding to simple commands and appears to recognize people." It's a positive development, though we're still in the early stages of assessing the extent of damage. Later that day, I was permitted a brief visit to her room. The woman in the hospital bed barely resembled the mother I remembered, smaller, somehow diminished by tubes and monitors, half of her face drooping from the stroke's effects. Yet when her eyes focused on me, there was clear recognition, and something else I couldn't immediately identify. "The speech therapist will assess her communication capabilities tomorrow," the nurse explained as I prepared to leave. "But she may be able to communicate in simple ways now. Short questions with yes-no responses are best." I hesitated, then stepped back to the bedside. "Mom, do you know who I am?" I asked clearly. A slight nod, her right hand moving fractionally. "Are you in pain?" A small shake of the head. I prepared to leave, then paused as a question formed, one I hadn't planned but suddenly needed to ask. "Did you name me as your healthcare proxy because you trust my judgment?" Her eyes fixed on mine, more alert than they had been, and she managed a distinct nod. Then, with visible effort, she moved her right hand to touch her heart, and then gestured weakly toward me. The gesture's meaning wasn't entirely clear, but its intentionality was unmistakable. Whatever complicated emotions and motives had driven our relationship in this vulnerable moment, she was acknowledging something between us. Trust, respect, perhaps even a form of love that existed alongside the manipulation and betrayal. As I left the hospital that evening, my emotions were even more complex than when I had arrived. The situation had raised questions I hadn't anticipated, about forgiveness without forgetting, about compassion without compromise, about the possibility of relating to family members in new ways that acknowledged past harm while allowing for changed dynamics. This unexpected challenge wasn't simply about navigating a medical crisis or shouldering unwanted responsibility. It was about integrating my newfound strength and boundaries with the complicated reality that even toxic family relationships contain threads of genuine connection. The woman who had betrayed me had also, in her own way, recognized qualities in me that she valued enough to trust with her most vulnerable moments. In my regular session with Dr. Chen the following day, I expressed my confusion about these conflicting realities. Human relationships are rarely all good or all bad, she observed. Even in situations of serious betrayal, there are often elements of genuine connection. The challenge is acknowledging that complexity without using it to justify continued harmful patterns. So what does that mean practically? I asked. How do I fulfill this responsibility without being drawn back into unhealthy dynamics? By maintaining clear boundaries while showing appropriate compassion, she replied. You can make thoughtful, healthcare decisions based on your mother's documented wishes without resuming a caretaking role in other aspects of her life. You can interact with respect and kindness during this crisis without erasing the reality of past harm. Her guidance helped me formulate an approach that honored my obligations without compromising my well-being. A middle path between callous abandonment and self-sacrificing re-engagement. I would fulfill my legal responsibilities as healthcare proxy, communicate clearly and directly with medical staff, and maintain emotional boundaries that protected my hard-won equilibrium. This unexpected challenge had appeared just as my new life was finding its rhythm. Yet rather than derailing my progress, it offered an opportunity to test and strengthen the boundaries and self-respect I had been cultivating. The true measure of recovery from toxic family dynamics wasn't complete separation, but the ability to engage without being consumed, to remain true to myself even when old patterns exerted their pull. As my mother began what would be a long and difficult recovery process, I realized that this challenge was actually confirming how far I had come. 6 months earlier, I would have abandoned my own needs to support my family without question. Now, I could extend compassion without compromising my boundaries, fulfill responsibilities without sacrificing my autonomy, and remain connected to my values even in circumstances designed to test them. My mother's stroke recovery created a complex new chapter in our relationship, one governed by medical necessity rather than choice. As her designated healthcare proxy, I consulted with her medical team regularly, authorized appropriate treatments, and coordinated with rehabilitation specialists. I maintained clear boundaries throughout, limiting my involvement to healthcare decisions and brief hospital visits that were respectful but not overly familiar. Rebecca, however, stepped into a more direct caregiving role than I had anticipated. She visited daily, helped with physical therapy exercises, and advocated fiercely for our mother's needs with hospital staff. This unexpected dedication surprised me. I had always seen my sister as self-centered and entitled, but her commitment during this crisis revealed dimensions of her character I had never acknowledged. As weeks passed and our mother stabilized, enough for discharge planning, a new challenge emerged. Her condition required significant ongoing care and supervision, but her financial resources were limited following our settlement. The condo she had transferred to my trust as part of the restitution had been her primary residence. Now she needed suitable housing with accessibility features and proximity to medical facilities. She can't afford proper assisted living, Rebecca explained during one of our now regular conversations in the hospital cafeteria. And her insurance won't cover the level of home care she needs. I knew exactly where this was headed, a request for financial assistance, a test of my new boundaries. I prepared myself to refuse firmly but compassionately, to suggest alternative resources, to maintain the separation I had worked so hard to establish. But Rebecca surprised me again. I've decided to have her move in with me, she said, stirring her coffee absently. I can convert the home office into a bedroom with the accessibility features she needs. It's all on one level, which works for her mobility issues. That's a significant commitment, I replied, genuinely stunned by her willingness to assume this responsibility. Rebecca's expression was uncharacteristically serious. I know. But I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. The trust, Dad's intentions, how Mom manipulated both of us in different ways. I enabled her behavior for years because it benefited me. I can't change that, but I can step up now. Her self-awareness and accountability were entirely unexpected. For the first time in our adult relationship, I saw my sister not as the spoiled, entitled person I had resented, but as someone capable of growth and reflection. "What about your lifestyle?" I asked, knowing how she valued her freedom and social activities. "Caregiving is demanding, especially with stroke recovery." "It won't be easy," she acknowledged. "But maybe it's time I learned some responsibility. I've been, well, useless, frankly. 33 years old and nothing to show for it except a string of failed relationships and abandoned projects." She gave a self-deprecating smile. "Besides, Jake left last month, said he was tired of waiting for me to grow up." Maybe he had a point. This vulnerability from Rebecca, the admission of her own shortcomings, the recognition of patterns I had observed but never expected her to acknowledge, shifted something in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of seeing her as a fully dimensional person rather than simply my antagonist. The conversation marked a turning point in our estranged relationship. Not a reconciliation, but the tentative establishment of a more honest interaction than we had ever managed before. We began coordinating our mother's care from our respective positions, Rebecca handling daily needs and living arrangements, me managing medical decisions and financial aspects of healthcare. With this unexpected situation stabilizing, I turned my attention back to my own life, only to find that the ground I had thought solid was suddenly shifting beneath me. It began with subtle changes at work. Meridian Tech had been acquired by a larger corporation, and rumors of reorganization and efficiency measures circulated through every department. My position as VP of Operations seemed secure initially, but the company culture began to transform in concerning ways. The balanced approach to work that I had carefully established with Elaine's support was increasingly at odds with the new leadership's expectations. "They're tracking login times now," my assistant whispered one morning. "And there's talk of eliminating remote work options." The changes ran counter to everything I valued about my role: the meaningful work, the respect for boundaries, the emphasis on results rather than hours logged. Increasingly, I found myself in meetings defending my team's processes against arbitrary metrics imposed by executives who barely understood our function. At the same time, my relationship with Daniel hit unexpected turbulence. What had been developing naturally and positively for months suddenly seemed to stall as he withdrew emotionally following a job offer in another state. "It's an incredible opportunity," he explained during a tense dinner conversation. "The kind that might not come around again." "I understand that," I replied, genuinely wanting to support his career growth. "We could try long distance for a while, see how it evolves." His hesitation told me everything before he verbalized it. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of commitment yet." The words landed like a physical blow. After 6 months of deepening connection, of vulnerable conversations and shared experiences, he wasn't willing to invest in maintaining our relationship through a temporary geographical separation. The implication was clear. What we had built together was valuable but ultimately dispensable if it became inconvenient. Within a 2-week period, both the professional stability and personal connection that had formed the foundation of my new life seemed to be crumbling. I maintained composure, externally, continuing to function effectively at work and ending things with Daniel amicably. But internally, doubt began to creep in, undermining the confidence I had been rebuilding. Had I been naive to believe I could create lasting stability after years of chaos? Had I misread the signals in my relationship, seeing depth where there was only pleasant companionship? Was I fundamentally unsuited for the balanced, healthy life I had been constructing? These questions plagued me as I drove home one evening, my thoughts spiraling into increasingly dark territory. The rain that had been threatening all day finally broke, sheeting across my windshield and matching my internal emotional landscape. I barely noticed the slick roads until a car in the oncoming lane hydroplaned, swerving dangerously close to the center line before its driver regained control. The near miss jolted me back to immediate awareness, but the surge of adrenaline was followed by a wave of overwhelming emotion. I pulled into a shopping center parking lot, put the car in park, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything I had been managing. The medical responsibility for a mother who had betrayed me, the unexpected recalibration with a sister I had written off, the professional uncertainty in a job I had poured myself into, the personal rejection from someone I had begun to trust deeply. For the first time since discovering the truth about my inheritance, I sobbed. Deep, body-shaking releases that had less to do with any specific loss, and more with the cumulative strain of navigating so much fundamental change in such a compressed time frame. When the storm of emotion finally subsided, I sat in the quiet of my car, watching rain trace patterns down the windows and listening to the rhythmic swish of wipers. An unexpected thought surfaced with strange clarity. This pain wasn't evidence that I had failed or chosen poorly. It was simply part of living authentically, of engaging genuinely with life's uncertainties rather than numbing myself through work and obligation as I had for so many years. I drove home slowly, exhausted but somehow clearer. After a hot shower, I wrapped myself in a comfortable robe and settled into the reading nook created during my home renovation. A small space with a window seat overlooking the garden, bookshelves on either side, perfectly proportioned for reflection. Opening my journal, I began to write without censoring or structuring my thoughts, allowing whatever emerged to flow onto the page. What appeared surprised me with its raw honesty. I'm afraid that I don't know who I am without crisis to manage. For 12 years, my identity was wrapped in sacrifice and responsibility for others. Now, with those constraints removed, I feel untethered, uncertain of my value and purpose. Work gave me clear metrics for success. Familial obligation provided a ready-made purpose. Even my relationship with Daniel offered a defined role. Without these external frameworks, who am I? What matters to me? Not as someone's daughter or sister or employee or partner, but as myself alone. The questions felt both terrifying and necessary. The essence of what Dr. Chen had described as the dark night of the soul that often precedes genuine transformation. This wasn't a setback on my journey toward autonomy and authenticity. It was a crucial passage through the dismantling of old identities toward something new and as yet undefined. I continued writing until exhaustion overtook me, falling asleep there in the window seat with the journal open beside me. When I awoke before dawn, stiff but strangely peaceful, I realized I had slept more deeply than I had in weeks. Something had shifted during those hours of unconsciousness. Not a resolution to my questions, but perhaps a deeper acceptance of the questioning itself. Over the following days, I leaned into the discomfort of uncertainty rather than rushing to resolve it. Instead of immediately looking for another job as the work situation at Meridian continued to deteriorate, I took time to consider what elements of my career had brought genuine satisfaction versus what I had pursued out of habit or expectation. Rather than seeking another relationship to replace what I had lost with Daniel, I explored my own desires and boundaries more thoroughly. During this period of introspection, Eleanor Rhodes again provided unexpected wisdom. Now in her late 70s, she had navigated multiple major life transitions and seemed to recognize my struggle without my having to articulate it fully. The hardest transitions aren't between clearly defined states, she observed during one of our regular garden conversations. They're the passages through formlessness, when you've left what was but haven't yet discovered what will be. Most people rush through that uncomfortable space, grasping at the first solid identity or structure that presents itself. That's exactly where I am, I admitted. Between identities, between structures. It's disorienting. It's also incredibly fertile, she countered. If you can tolerate the uncertainty, this space contains possibilities you couldn't imagine, from within your previous framework. Her perspective helped me reframe my experience not as a failure of my rebuilding efforts, but as a necessary deepening of them, moving from external rearrangement to internal reconfiguration. The dark night wasn't a detour from my path to autonomy and fulfillment, but an essential passage through which that path necessarily ran. As October gave way to November, I made an unexpected decision. Rather than immediately seeking another corporate position as the situation at Meridian became untenable, I would take a 3-month sabbatical. The restored trust funds provided sufficient financial security for this breathing space, and for the first time in my adult life, I would prioritize discernment over immediate productivity. I submitted my resignation to the new management team, providing generous notice and a comprehensive transition plan for my responsibilities. Their surprised reactions confirmed that I had made the right decision. They had expected me to tolerate increasingly unreasonable expectations indefinitely, counting on my history of accommodation and my fear of uncertainty. But the woman cleaning out her desk in November was not the same one who had walked out of that restaurant 8 months earlier. That Olivia had been defined by external expectations and validation. This one was learning to navigate by an internal compass, even when the path led through darkness and uncertainty. The dark night hadn't ended, but I had stopped fighting it, had begun to recognize it not as an absence of light, but as a different kind of illumination, revealing aspects of myself and possibilities for my future that would have remained invisible in the full glare of certainty and definition. As I carried the last box of personal items to my car on my final day, Elaine met me in the parking lot, having returned from a business trip specifically to say goodbye in person. "This company is losing far more than they realize," she said, embracing me warmly. "But I suspect you're gaining something far more valuable." "I hope so," I replied, "though I'm still not entirely sure what that is." Her smile was knowing. The best journeys rarely come with detailed maps, but they do require courage, which you clearly have in abundance. Driving away from the building where I had spent so many years of my life, I felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration, the vertigo of freefall combined with the thrill of flight. The dark night continued, but within it, subtle shapes were beginning to emerge, possibilities taking form in the darkness like stars becoming visible as eyes adjust to night. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.